Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 15th of March 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson and Brian Gerrish. We're also joined by Alex Thompson, and of course, Alex delivering Eastern approaches from the Netherlands. So I think we're still running, we're still hiding, and we're still telling about the Russians, Mike.
Absolutely. Yesterday evening, there was a meeting in the Security Council. Well, let's have a listen to see what our illustrious Chargé d'Affaires in the UNSC had to say.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for arranging this urgent meeting of the Security Council today to give the United Kingdom the opportunity to update Council colleagues on our investigation into a nerve agent attack in Salisbury. On Sunday, the 4th of March, Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia were found in the town centre, slipping out of consciousness on a public bench, and were taken to hospital by our emergency services, where they remain in a very serious condition. Investigations by world-leading experts at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory at Porton Down, accredited by the Organisation for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, OPCW, discovered that they had been exposed to a nerve agent. We have concluded that Mr. Skripal and his daughter were poisoned with a Novichok, a military-grade nerve agent of a type developed by Russia. It is not a weapon which can be manufactured by non-state actors.
Brian, it's not a weapon which can be manufactured by non-state actors, and yet we have academics pushing out this information. We mentioned this yesterday, saying quite clearly synthesis at bench scale of organic chemicals such as the purported Novichoks is within the capability of a modern chemistry laboratory. Porton Down itself must have been able to synthesize these compounds in order to develop tests for them. The detection of such a compound does not establish Russian origin. That's a pretty clear statement from the academic community. But in the United Nations Security Council, are we lying?
Well, we're either lying, Mike, or else there's just unbelievable incompetence suddenly spreading not only across government, but through our emergency services, through our intelligence services, and through the British military, and through Porton Down. It's either lying or it's incompetence on a scale which is really difficult to say, yes, that's a possibility.
Well, let's go on then.
Based on the knowledge that Russia has previously produced this agent, and combined with Russia's record of conducting state-sponsored assassinations, including against former intelligence officers whom they regard as legitimate targets, the UK government concluded that it was highly likely that Russia was responsible for this reckless act. The Russian state was responsible for the attempted murder of Mr. Skripal and his daughter and police officer Nick Bailey.
So there we have the statement early in the statement that it's highly likely, and then a few sentences later, it's absolutely definitive. But Alex, this issue, if we bring you into the programme here, this issue of state-sponsored assassination. Is it only Russia which is, in fact, is there any proof that Russia is actually involved in state-sponsored assassinations? And is it only Russia that's involved in state-sponsored assassinations?
It's not only Russia, Mike, and the question very much is the state element of state-sponsored. The term itself, you're echoing, of course, there the well-used term that has got some kind of ambiguity in it. What group of people constitutes a state? Megyn Kelly of NBC has reprised her interview of President Putin of nearly a year ago, and she's asking about the supposed nobbling of the American elections. And in that, she takes the view that, come on, you're the head of state, you must have ordered this. And the same kind of insinuations are being made in the Skripal case, leaving aside whether or not it was Russians who administered anything to Colonel Skripal and to Yulia, his daughter. What constitutes the state is not entirely clear. Craig Murray, our former ambassador in Uzbekistan, I think you'll be mentioning him later as well, has pointed out that, if anything, Novichok, which is simply a Russian noun meaning newcomer, new type, that is actually something that was developed by an Uzbek and the facilities for it continued on the territory of Uzbekistan after the breakup of the Soviet Union, not Russia. It's an Uzbek agent, if anything more than it's a Russian agent. We've got someone in the chat room talking about India manufacturing as well, which is perfectly possible given the close links between Central Asian and Indian biological and chemical scientists. So that there's far too many uncertainties involved here. But to answer the first part of your question again, no, Russia is certainly not the only country that does things in this bracket of deniable but state-associated assassination.
Is it possible that Britain has in the past?
It is possible. These things come out in books. Brian has mentioned a couple over the course of different programs, books which collate some of the evidence. We have really to do with questions of networks of people who take knowledge and intent with them out of active service as intelligence or military assets of a country into something of a more private consultancy role. And then the boundaries are blurred. Is it state or private? Is it national or international action?
Yeah. Okay, well, let's continue then.
We have already heard the attacks and threats that Russia has made over the past few days. We know that there will be more to come. This is how Russia has acted in every other case where it has been caught flouting international law: denial, distraction, and threats. It is what Russia does. But we will not let such threats deter us. We will not weaken our resolve. We will stand firm, confident in our democracy, our rule of law, and the freedom of our people. We will stand by the values which are shared by the overwhelming majority of those in this Council, in this United Nations. And we ask you today to stand by us.
Honestly, Brian, that is cringeworthy. And if he represents the standards by which the majority of the people within the United Nations Security Council operate, then the world's in a pretty bad place.
Well, I'm going to say I suspect he isn't the same standard as other people in that UN Council. That is a very young man. He's been given words to read. If the words were delivered by an older statesman person, then they could have some impact. But it's a script. It's like something out of a film. It's designed to be emotive. I'm going to say it's pathetic. A few of our chat box commentators this morning have said, will he grow into his suit? Which I think sums it up.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Now, the issue is, what is this all about? And they are going to continue ramping up the pressure here. I'm just going to remind everybody what Alistair Burt, International Development Minister, said last month. He was complaining bitterly, and this is something that has been echoed by several others within the cabinet. Russia's repeated vetoes, which ended the UN Security Council mandated joint investigative mechanism, risks sending a dangerous signal to the Syrian regime that it can use chemical weapons with impunity. They have been bitterly complaining, Alex, over the last 6 months or so about Russia and China vetoing the West's efforts to pursue its geopolitical aims with impunity. And so we get this type of statement for Alistair Burt. I believe that that's probably what we're going to see over the next period of time is an effort to get Russia off the UN Security Council. The question is that possible, and is it likely?
We would be shooting ourselves in the foot if we did it. It is possible by reviewing the founding documents, the Charter of the United Nations, which, by the way, were written by convicted globalist and communist spy Olga Hiss, a convicted traitor to the United States. But that charter's still in place, much as the same with Peter Newell's drafting of the UN Convention for the Rights of the Child. In David Scott's recent article on the front page of ukcolumn.org, you can read an analogy there. It is possible, but you're basically rejigging the Constitution of the United Nations. And while doing that, of course, you may, this may actually be what the British government wants, you may find that by the same token, the UN will say, okay, we'll take Russia off, but it's time to review this parade of United Nations, of Allied victors from 1945 in the permanent membership, so Britain and France lose their permanent seat. Perhaps Germany will get in, or perhaps there'll be a combined EU seat. And it's interesting that it's Alistair Burt saying this because, of course, he's DFID, not Foreign Office. And as we've been reporting, DFID, the Department for International Development, seems to be pulling all our foreign policy and security policy strings these days. We'll see more of that later.
Well, that's right, Alex, but it wasn't just Alistair Burt saying it. I've highlighted his quote because that was the one that came easiest to hand, but Boris Johnson's been complaining, Theresa May's been complaining as well, so it's right across the cabinet. What's next?
Well, the issue is decontamination, Mike, and I've got to say I'm going to pull a little bit of rank here because I served 21 years in the Royal Navy during the Cold War period, and defence against chemical and biological weapons was an absolute major part of the training. It was rigorous and everybody took it incredibly seriously. So I've been watching this incident unfold, particularly from how the government has handled the decontamination. They're handling supposedly nerve agents, how they've gone about this. Now, I've just got on screen the letter that we mentioned briefly yesterday. This was Amber Rudd responding to Yvette Cooper. She says the government was aware of these allegations about murder, state involvement, takes any suggestion that a foreign state is engaged in murder on UK soil very seriously. As you know, police investigations and coroner requests at the time did not discover evidence of foul play. As I stated in the House on the 8th of March, my immediate priority and that of the police and other operational partners is responding to the attempted murders in Salisbury, including decontamination, local assurance and criminal investigation. So I've put alongside that an article, I should have labelled that, from the Telegraph, Russian spy poisoning, latest pictures, put Salisbury on lockdown. And we've also got a quote from the Times where a Macron spokesman yesterday accused Theresa May of fantasy politics for the speed of her decision to retaliate against Russia. That's all disappearing into the long grass now though, Mike, I think. So I'm going to say decontamination. What decontamination? This is not decontamination, it is a puppet show. This is fantasy. And let's have a look at a bit of this. So here we've got a Telegraph article, and they come in with Novichok. What should I do if I think I've been exposed to a nerve agent? Let's have a look and see what Public Health England had to say. The risk to Salisbury public is extremely low. That's a remarkable statement in itself. If you were in the Mill pub or Zizi's restaurant, take precautions. But these precautions are unspecified, Mike. Clean your clothes, wash them. Place dry clean clothes in 2 bags. Wash your possessions with soap and water. And then I've added sit and worry, because this is exactly what is now going on. These are absolutely untenable suggestions to people that could have been exposed to a nerve agent. And of course, it's not just people who were in the Mill pub or Zizi's. We know that the father and his daughter were taken into a local hospital, and at the time they were taken in, there wasn't any awareness for nerve agent use. So presumably they have been in decontaminating the whole hospital. But surprisingly, you don't hear anything about that at all. Nothing at all. So let's follow it through. Let's come on to have a look at the effects of Novichok and see what we're actually dealing with. And it's pretty unpleasant, as all these agents are. So they work by disrupting the chemical signals between nerves and muscles. Breathing becomes difficult, loss of control of bodily functions. You start to salivate, convulsions, paralysis, coma, respiratory failure, and death. Now, you might have all of that very quickly, and you might be dead very quickly, or this may take place over several hours. But once you've touched this stuff, you're on the route to death. There is no ifs or buts about that. They don't mention headache, pinpointing of pupils, and vomiting. This was a key part of what we were told about in the military. Have I worn the gas masks? Have I worn the protection suits? Have I taken part in these exercises? Yes, I have. And what you are constantly told is minute traces, you are dead. On your skin or ingest by breathing, you are dead. So there we are, the effect within minutes or hours, and you can either absorb this stuff through the skin or you're going to ingest it in some way. And we now, of course, know that those who initially recover from, let's say they get a minuscule dose and they recover months or years later, they have got major health problems. This is well documented. Now, who did this article use to comment on this deadly nerve agent? Well, they went to Northumbria University and spoke to this lady, Dr. Michelle Carlin, who started her training looking at dyes. Then she did a project with the French police, and now she's a teacher. I'm sorry to be a bit hard on the lady, but this to me is hardly a person to be commenting on Russian nerve agents. And let's have a look at the decontamination measures. Sorry, I just need to call these up on the other screen here. So we've got the fact that UK's Porton Down and intelligence service were unable to identify a known Russian nerve agent, allegedly Novichok, for days. This to me is unbelievable. If we can't identify a known agent, we would be gone in time of war because the battle would have gone on for the length of time. So 4 days in order to identify a known nerve agent. No containment zone was established around the incident. If you remember with foot and mouth, immediately a farm had a problem. There was a ring put around it. People weren't allowed in or out. And then you started to work from there to see where the danger was. Advice to wash clothes and double bag. This is nonsense with a nerve agent. Absolute nonsense, because you might have it on your clothes. It hasn't gone on your skin. You touch your clothes, it's on your skin, you die. Or you put contaminated clothes in a bag and give it to some poor refuse operator who's then contaminated. We've got declaration of individual locations, such as a car park ticket machine, is contaminated without that containment area is incompetence or fantasy. I can't think of any better words for it. The BBC and other press reports state that Skripal's contaminated car was initially taken to a local car pound, thereby placing the public at risk. Later reports state the car was taken to Porton Down, but the authorities were unsure of the location of the initial tow truck. Incompetence or fantasy, Mike?
Fantasy,
yeah.
I'm saying.
Civil and military decontamination teams dressed in the full protective suits are freely mingling with unprotected police, military and civilians. This is either dramatic incompetence or theatre, as non-protected persons will be at risk. And then no decontamination stations, let's bring that in, for the protected personnel have been observed. If you go near this stuff, even though you've got the full kit on, you are then contaminated, you have to be decontaminated, and that requires full specialised decontamination areas. Haven't seen any sign of that. Salisbury and the surrounding area has had approximately 25 millimetres of rain in March. Rain, and particularly heavy rain, would have removed all but major persistent contamination. And this stuff is not persistent because it's in a powdered form, we're supposed to believe. So this doesn't make sense. And no basic washing down of surfaces has been observed. So I haven't seen them spraying anything to clean benches, public seats, or hospital ticket machines. Alex, I've got a little bit more to go on this, but I'm almost having difficulty getting this over to our audience because each step that I go through, procedures are not being followed if this was indeed a nerve agent attack. Now, I'm not saying an agent wasn't used, but what I am looking at is this piecemeal decontamination, which is fantasy.
Well, like you, Brian, I've been through all the drills, including at Porton Down. I've had all the kit on and had the guys shouting at me about, obviously we weren't practicing with the deceased kind of organophosphate nerve agents, but rudimentary gases just simply are very unpleasant if you inhale them. People who haven't been through that perhaps don't realise just how very strict indeed you have to be. Everything is drilled. The sequence in which you breathe in, breathe out, put the togs on is very controlled, and yet we see images, for example, of the squaddies up at Salisbury doing their decon, with next to them in the same shot Wiltshire Fire Brigade simply wearing their day uniforms with no breathing apparatus and with exposed skin. What a ludicrous situation.
Yeah. It is incredible, isn't it? And we can produce more on this. I'll just end on this one. So we're back to The Guardian. Police home in on 5 key locations in Skripal attempted murder case. Experts focus on the home, the bench where he and daughter fell ill, Salisbury restaurant and pub, and BMW car. So let's see what comes in now. Well, we've got a former commander of the MBCD. This is the Chemical Biological Protection Regiment, as was. He says it's plausible that the nerve agent could have arrived in the post or in a gift. You open a letter and the stuff goes all over the place. It's equally plausible that an agent could have delivered it. You only need a drop to drop a small amount in someone's pocket or brush past them. So we've got a thing which is so deadly that if you even brush past the people on the bench, you are contaminated and you're going to show the effects. But this is not catered with by the government. And attention seems to home in on the BMW on Thursday, 4 days after the pair were taken ill, when teams of Met counter-terrorism officers and military experts in hazmat suits arrived at the Ashley Wood Recovery Garage on the Churchfields Industrial Estate in Salisbury to examine the car and take it away. Paramedics stood by while the work was done. So a car which could have been contaminated was simply dumped in a public car pound. This is not tenable. I believe the reason that this is not tenable is because the British government's story as to what's happened here is not true. And because it is not true, the emergency services, the decontamination teams can't operate properly. I'm not saying a substance wasn't used. What I'm saying is the government's story about that substance is not true, in my opinion.
Indeed. Well, somebody that was asking questions about this was Jeremy Corbyn yesterday in the House of Commons after Theresa May had made her statement. Let's have a listen to what he asked.
I welcome the fact the police are working with the OPCW. And has the Prime Minister taken the necessary steps under the Chemical Weapons Convention to make a formal request for evidence from the Russian government under Article 9.2? How has she responded to the Russian government's request for a sample of the agent used in the Salisbury attack to run its own tests? Has high-resolution trace analysis been run on a sample of the nerve agent, and has that revealed any evidence as to the location of its production or the identity of its perpetrators? And can the Prime Minister update the House on what conversations, if any, she has had with the Russian government?
So that was a few very reasonable questions, in my opinion. There's nothing wrong with those questions whatsoever.
I would say they're the right questions, Mike. These are exactly the questions to ask.
Right, and so he's getting lambasted not only by the Tory benches for asking those questions, but as time has gone on, by people in his own party. So Labour Party at civil war once again as a result. And of course, with the full complicity of the press, because rather than the press asking the questions, which is what they should be doing, they're merely supporting the government. So Corbyn crisis, pressure mounts on Jeremy Corbyn as top Labour MPs launch rebellion over his claims Russia may not be behind spy poison scandal. This is The Sun. And they highlight the fact that in a press conference following that statement or those questions in the Commons, Corbyn's spokesman Seamus Milne had said, there's a history between weapons of mass destruction and intelligence, which is problematic, to put it mildly. And this is an opinion which, of course, is held by other people. Craig Murray here, former ambassador to various countries, Kazakhstan, various other countries, asking this same question or making the same point. The Novichoks story is indeed another Iraqi weapons of mass destruction scam. So just before I ask Alex for comment on this, I want to highlight Alex's article, which has gone up on the UK Column website today. Skripal, a Russian web or a Rusi web is the question that's being asked. So Alex, give me your thoughts on Corbyn's comments and also Seamus Milne's comments first, and then tell us a bit about this article.
Well, Mr. Corbyn, of course, is as much thinking about his own time when he was the dissident wing of his own party, when his party was in government in 2003, as he is playing the role of leader of the opposition, Her Majesty's loyal opposition, a concept that seems to have gone out the window, Mike, now, because he seems to be being called a traitor by the government and half of his own party just for asking these questions. These are, of course, the right questions. Mr. Corbyn's motives and morals are up for grabs in some cases. People have various views on them. But in this case, as in many others I've seen, he is soundly asking the right questions. And really, it's quite a disgrace that he isn't being given proper answers to them. You have to do high-res analysis to find out what's going on. And that leads me on to talk about this article as well, because the point I'm making here is, or one of the many I'm making, it's a sort of an unclassified level resume of everything I know about this from over the years, is that the actual manufacture of the agent is not the key point. That's a red herring. The question is what strain, in the case of biological, or here we have a chemical, so what signature of the agent was used, and what was the chain of possession of it. Does it come from a cache or a stash which was buried by the Soviets in the West and whose location was betrayed or sold? We just don't have any answers to these kinds of questions. And what we do have is a grey blob of former MI6 officers who are known for various associated, closely and intimately associated forms of false flag and turning of Russians in this and very similar domains. And that, I think, is where we need to look first.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, just
yes.
to press, Alex, do you want to say anything on specifically on your article? Would you point people at certain parts of it?
Really, the first half of it is talking about how the intelligence apparatus works and saying that there is groupthink, which inevitably develops. And in the case of CBRN threats like this, it's the word of a couple of Porton down guys that always wins out, which is not necessarily a bad thing because that's where the expertise reposes. So it's Porton down investigating whether Porton down did something ultimately or had a hand in something. And in the second half, I go on to talk about the use of Estonians and Chechens in a long pattern over at least 20 years to destabilize Russia. And the point there is that the personalities involved are very much the same people, the officers who recruited Mr. Skripal, particularly Mr. Pablo Miller, living in Salisbury itself, who, as many people have reported, Moon of Alabama and Medusa, who also broke the story on the Ukrainians, the snipers in Ukraine from Georgia and Lithuania last year. They've pointed out that Mr. Miller is a long-term colleague of Christopher Steele's, and that Mr. Miller, using a Spanish alias, Antonio Alvarez de Hidalgo, recruited Mr. Skripal in Spain and Turkey in the 90s. And many of these characters realized what was going on after the Litvinenko death and the Andrei Lugovoy press conference. Lugovoy was the man blamed for Litvinenko's death, and realized that this was a Berezovsky clique, really, of MI6 officers who weren't serving British national interests. And they actually went and jumped back into the hands of the Russian FSB, wanting lenient sentences there to save their lives, because otherwise they feared they were going to be liquidated. That's the real background to this story, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and Alex, there's some rejigging of the former Soviet bloc going on.
Two angles at once. On the left, we have Strategic Culture, a very high-quality alternative site talking about the revivification of a bloc called Guam, the magic shrinking bloc, because the acronym used to stand for Georgia, Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, Moldova, when it was founded 10 years ago as a kind of Saakashvili alternative, Soros alternative to the Commonwealth of Independent States, the former Soviet Union's trading bloc. But Guam quickly became Guam because the Uzbeks pulled out, and now it's really a kind of GUM, also the acronym of the Moscow shopping center, but that's a coincidence because the Azeris are getting closer to Russia now in the hope that Russia will regain Nagorno-Karabakh for them from Armenia. And so only Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldova now are pursuing Russian policy interests, but they're reviving it and talking about making it a kind of mini NATO or mini EU within the former Soviet Union. And at the same time, as reported there by Fort Russ News, we have the Georgians in this form, in this case, the Prime Minister Georgi Kudikashvili, talking about trying to restore full diplomatic relations with Russia, something that Britain has just broken. but the Georgians have had broken since the South Ossetia War 10 years ago. So there's a complicated play going on to see whether these fringe countries can actually be assets of the West and yet still in full association with Russia.
Now, yesterday we were talking about the possibility that this could lead to war, but you're asking whether it's actually possible, bearing in mind the cost.
Yes, we've got some quite frank admissions now by US senior officers in the really expensive bits of the US military. That's the Navy and the Air Force. And of course, the Navy flies planes as much as the Air Force does. The F-35 price tag could be $16 billion. $10 billion of that is the purchase price, and what makes it half as expensive again is $5 billion in odd and, to my mind, corrupt dongle and upgrade, licensing payments to the manufacturers such as Lockheed, which is something David Ellis's articles at ukcolumn.org/defense talk about. And on the right, we have the Secretary to the US Navy talking about the eye-watering $100 billion cost of the Columbia class of new bombers, or boomers as they call them in America, the nuclear subs. We, of course, still don't have our replacement for Trident, and David Ellis and I are two of many who are starting to say, will we actually get one, or will it be a new class of nuclear deterrent? It's looking like the conventional ways of waging nuclear war are going to be too costly, and we're going to have some kind of limited skirmish instead for World War III. That seems to be the planned outcome for it.
Let's see another possible planned outcome and increasing insanity in the mainstream media. This is the Telegraph, and this is an article by Alistair Heath, who's editor of the Sunday Telegraph. It says, "Forget NATO, we need a new world alliance to take on totalitarian capitalists in Russia and China." And he says, about halfway down the article, I'm starting from here, he says, "Second, we must take the lead in building a new global military and economic alliance of the like-minded countries committed to the promotion of capitalism and liberal democracy. NATO is no longer enough. It's too European. Too many of its members are outright pacifists, and Turkey's membership is problematic. The UN is ineffective and, like NATO, a product of previous 20th century conflict. The new network should be based on mutual self-interest and respectful of national sovereignty. It would be open to all liberal democracies that practice capitalism and that respect human rights, intellectual property and privacy. It should be a values alliance governed by a treaty guaranteeing military self-help and seeking the freest possible trade in goods and services. America would be a member, as would Canada, India, Israel, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, France, if it remains sufficiently distinct from the emerging European superstate, and many others. Such an alliance would be the biggest shift in geopolitics since the creation of the United Nations. It would dramatically shift the global balance of power and allow the liberal democracies finally to fight back. It would endow the world with the sorts of robust institutions that are required to contain Russia and China and to deal with cyber terrorism or chemical warfare. Britain needs a new role in the world. Building such a network would be our perfect mission." I don't even know where to start with that, Alex.
It's very much the language, Mike, of the mid-2000s, particularly 2006-ish, when the neocons were starting to talk about getting everyone that wasn't Russia and China into a group they called Global NATO. But as David Ellis has reported, NATO is a goner now. The military world-dominating superstate is building up from Europe outwards. But there's still, as I reported with the American efforts to rejig Guam there as well, there's still this element of in American thinking, if we can't let the Europeans run the whole show, we have to have our presence. There's a kind of blending of the worst globalist interests in both Europe and North America now, and I think they're realizing they have to form a federation of New World Order regions in order to bring Eurasia to heel.
Yeah.
I can also add to that, I notice in the headline there that the totalitarian capitalists are based in Russia, to which I say, no, the totalitarian capitalists are actually based in London and the other big Western financial centres.
Yes.
And these are the people that own the governments. And of course, we're seeing that those capitalists are the people that own the Conservative Party, with a mere 3 million in donations from totalitarian capitalists, Russian, since Theresa May's come into government. Her position is untenable.
Absolutely
Mike.
untenable. Gavin Williamson was speaking or giving a speech in Bristol and Felton at the Rolls-Royce factory today. He said, "We have arrived at a profound moment in our history, a crossroads to sit back and let events overtake us or step forward." So this is I've labelled him our next British Prime Minister. I believe that's exactly what is the case.
When he was a boy, we decided he'd be a good Prime Minister.
That was David Cameron, but I would imagine that's the same situation here. He has been groomed for the job, perhaps.
He has a beautiful mouth, apparently, is why he was selected.
Oh, really? Yes. Okay. Well, he's apparently stressed that chemical threat does not just come from Russia, and so he has announced that he's going to offer. He's claiming that they're going to be voluntary, but he's going to offer anthrax vaccinations to everybody in the British Army, British military, sorry. And he said that we know the chemical threat doesn't just come from Russia, but from others. But we have a world-class expertise at the Defence Science Technology Laboratory, Portadown. And today I can announce we'll be strengthening this capability by investing £48 million in the new Chemical Weapons Defence Centre to ensure we maintain our cutting edge in chemical analysis and defence. It's amazing how many things are coming out of this one event, Brian, because suddenly chemical weapons are right back at the forefront of everybody's minds, and we're putting large amounts of money into future research and development.
We can't react to the NHS or roads like this. When a big problem comes up in the NHS, we can't suddenly find money and get in there and get it sorted out. But on this one we can. And I find the mention of anthrax interesting because, of course, it was the British government that poisoned a whole island. As far as I know, that island is still largely untenable due to the spores. People can research that, of course. That's an island off the British coast. But the other thing, of course, is we vaccinated the military for the Iraq campaign. And what happened, I'm going to say tens of thousands of them had adverse reactions from those vaccinations. So would I feel safe with the British government vaccinating me as a military person? I wouldn't.
Okay, well, humanity's on the cusp, according to Ian Crane, and that's the theme for AV9. You're going to be speaking at it. Alex is going to be speaking at it as well. That's Friday the 4th of May to Monday the 7th of May in Horwood House Hotel near Milton Keynes. Details at alternativeview.co.uk. Ian will be in the studio this evening, so we do have live programmes tonight from Ian Crane, Humanity versus Insanity at 7:30 p.m. Fracking Nightmare at 9 o'clock. That's at ukcolumn.org/live. Now, let's just mention, Media on Trial, taking place in Leeds on the 27th of May. Details, mediaontrial.uk. Get along to that one, more important than ever. And we'll also mention Dying for Good Health at the Albert Hall. This is the UK Columns NHS conference. The speaking lineup is getting very interesting. We will be publishing that today or tomorrow, I guess. And get along to that one if you can. Details on the UK Column events page, and tickets available from the front page of the UK Column website. And I've also been asked to mention that the New Chartist Movement is holding an event in Nottingham on Saturday, on the 18th of March, which is Saturday, I guess. This is 15th. That must be, is that Sunday? Sorry. Yes.
Sorry.
Anyway, it's on the 18th of March. It's in Canal House in Nottingham. Get along to that one if you can. That's on Sunday. The details. If you freeze the screen, you can read the details on that. Right. Let's move quickly on now. The government has announced the creation of spaceports in the UK. This is fantastic news, part of the industrial strategy. British businesses will soon be able to compete in the commercial space race from UK spaceports. This is because the Space Industry Bill has got royal assent today. And this apparently unlocks an exciting era of British space innovation, exploration and investment. This will not only ensure Britain is capable of launching small satellites and scientific experiments from our own soil, but it's also going to be able to take advantage of future developments like hypersonic flight and high-speed point-to-point transport. So this is fantastic stuff. I think we got to contrast that this with Russia, of course, because of course they have already established that they have hypersonic technology. And if you were listening to Putin's State of the Nation speech, you would have heard that he intends that this technology filters down from the military into the real economy. And today he was announcing Moon and Mars missions. He's saying we're planning unmanned and later manned launches as part of lunar program and for Mars exploration. The closest mission is very soon. We're planning to launch a mission to Mars in 2019. Now, whether he meets that deadline or not, I don't think really matters. Again, we're going to see technology develop for this, filtering down into the Russian economy. He is changing Russia's orientation economically. They're already massively exporting from the farming industry and from other industries. They're moving away from hydrocarbons into high tech and other stuff. We're seeing a shift in Russia and China's geopolitics. We're seeing a deeper entrenchment of British and American geopolitics, yeah. Alex, and I don't see that it's going to end well for Britain or the United States.
No, because we took a deliberate decision as Britain and the United States not to use that technology. There was no question of a small nuclear reactor in the hypersonic weapon, such as you just showed the demonstration of back in the 60s. But there was all other elements of that besides were in place besides. In the 1960s, the weapon was called Skybolt, and Kennedy scrapped the funding for it. But Britain and America were on the cusp of developing such a non-parabolic weapon that would drop out of the underside of the fastest jet available, the TSR-2, if it had been built. So we have deliberately given ourselves a half-century loss of the lead that we would have had back then. And the Russians, together with their Eurasian neighbours, are talking about the very things which we don't talk about, which David Ellis keeps urging us to think about, the spinning off of military industrial technology into the real-world industrial applications, because that's the tree which keeps the population prosperous and comfortable. And we're not doing that.
Absolutely. Now, fake news. Alex, we're going to end with fake news today, and we're going to start off with the BBC. This is a new interactive game, you might call it. It's been set up by the BBC. It's called BBC iReporter. It's for children between the ages of 11 and 18, and it's to help children decide whether they can actually identify fake news or not. This is extremely helpful. They're calling it is a new game. It's developed by Aardman Studios, and it puts the player in the job of a BBC reporter. So you're notionally employed by the BBC. So here we go. Your role as a BBC journalist is to cover a breaking news story, publishing your story to a BBC Live site, and preparing for TV news bulletins throughout the day. You'll be judged on the accuracy and impact of your story, as well as your speed. You won't be able to rewind your day or go back, so make your choices wisely. And you can decide what age group you are when you take part in this. Of course, you get the opportunity to access BBC Reality Check, so you've got to push through information there.
This is a great advert. Underneath it, we've just got the BBC advertising itself and taking the moral high ground that we are the right people.
Oh, and it gets better because they produce useful guide for teachers. So this is intended to go into schools. So this is really fantastic stuff. We are already pushing out the information and the tools that our young people are going to need to identify fake news. And of course, it's one of the biggest purveyors of fake news on the planet, which is pushing this out. So that's fantastic. But Alex, fake news in Europe, remind us about this story.
On the 22nd of February this year, we reported that a charity calling itself Stichting F6 or F6 had been trailing on Facebook that it was setting up an initiative together with the students of the Media College Amsterdam called Channel 6 Fake News. And I asked them questions which at the time they and all the partners refused to answer or failed to answer about what was fake news, why were they doing it, how were they defining it. And now finally at 11:36 p.m. Dutch time on the 13th of March, the charity running it has become the first to reply to me. That is their logo, Stichting FS logo there, the kind of mad gecko staring at you. But this is what they're saying about the questions I asked them. They're saying that the training of the students was in setting up editorial board, editorial work, developing particular political topics. And they say which of the foul-mouthed young people were involved in which parts of the training. These trainers were selected because they represent a good mix of serious news, entertainment, and vlogging. What is meant by we'll be making fake news is that we'll be making news about the forthcoming Dutch local elections and the referendum abolition law, which means news items such as interviewing Amsterdam residents and politicians and other rubrics. Fake news is a part of that too. And then they answer the question, why are they doing this? The intention behind making fake news is to make clear to young people that fake news is easily made and to keep viewers sharp as to what is real and what is fake. And finally, I asked them about the definition and how they were making sure they weren't doing more harm than good in young people's minds. And they said, this is the government-funded charity. We found out that the initiative's largely funded by the Dutch Education Ministry. They say, we use the same definition of fake news as most journalists do, namely news which does not state sources. There's none of that in the British and Dutch mainstream news, of course not. We will be ensuring that both project participants and the public are not confused about how to determine reliability in the media by interweaving the true with the fake. We will be presenting a mix of true and fake, and that will help people not to be confused. You quite get that, Brian and Mike?
I think I absolutely get what's going on here, and this is interfering with the minds of the public. And I think we've got to remind people once again that the British government, I know this is in Holland, but the British government is so pleased with its ability to manipulate people's minds. It's selling that technology. I wonder if the Dutch have bought some of it.
Yes, that's it.
That's it. Alex, thank you very much for joining us. Well, there we are, just astonishing events in UK. We're going to see how this unfolds. But I was told by a gentleman yesterday he'd been talking to some local Conservative Party members who were literally demanding military action against Russia. His comment to me was he just could not believe that people would be so stupid as to be saying, well, as a result of this Russian attack on UK soil, we need to attack them. Just think about what that means. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. If you're not a subscriber of UK Column, we need your help. Please subscribe. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.